Welcome to Bovine Banter with the Penn State Extension Dairy Team. My name is Kasey Hauer, and I'm an educator based in Berks County, PA. Today, I'm excited to welcome another dairy educator, Micheal Lunak, based out of Bradford County, to our podcast. And today, we will be talking about how you may use your DHIA records to monitor subclinical ketosis. So thanks for being with us today, Micheal. To get us started, can you kind of introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us more about your background?
So I'm with Penn State Extension for the last 5 years, and I'm serving Tioga, Bradford, Susquehanna, and Sullivan counties. My background is business management and herd management. In previous life, I worked for several years as a dairy specialist for University of New Hampshire Extension. And again, I was working with dairy farmers on different herd management issues. And DHI records, I should say, were my primary source of information about those farms.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So as I said, this season of the podcast, we've been discussing transition cows, and we know that those 3 weeks pre and post calving are usually a time when cows are most susceptible to developing several different health issues. And one of those issues could be ketosis. So can you talk about that in a little more detail?
So upfront, I would like to mention, that what is ketosis and what we can imagine what happens in the body. So ketosis is a state, metabolic state that cows go through a negative energy balance. This state happens usually at the beginning of lactation, when body basically has an incredible demand for nutrients, especially, for energy. And because of lactation, and the body is not able, basically, the nutrition the cows get is not able to deliver it. So what happens is that the body start utilizing, body fat, body deposits. And the fat is being converted in the liver into fatty acids, then, into ketone bodies. And those ketone bodies are used as an alternative energy source. Well, the thing is, and that happens, in lots of cows on a regular basis. The problem is that if this deficit is too long, then too many ketone bodies are produced and are released into the blood. And suddenly we have, those ketone bodies. Now, and those ketone bodies are used, for us to diagnose subclinical ketosis. If there is too many ketone bodies and there is a really severe case of ketosis, well, we are not talking about subclinical ketosis, but a real case of ketosis, and that's visible. The problem with some subclinical ketosis is that farmers even don't know they have it. It's just there. And the only way, to find out is to do some sort of testing. So if we talk about ketosis, question is what kind of ketosis we have. So the first one we are interested in our podcast is the subclinical ketosis, which is characterized by fatty liver. Is that actually, this is the most prevalent ketosis on farms. And in the United States, I think 25% of farms and cows are actually affected by, subclinical ketosis. And if you look at the data in Europe, it's kind of surprising, the Western countries, Germany and Italy, Holland, they are looking 30, sometimes 45% of cows have subclinical ketosis. So this is not, anything that would be very unique to the United States. Mm-hmm. And the subclinical ketosis, again, it's caused by lactation, before the birth. It starts right there, when the body is getting ready for the lactation and when there is excessive mobilization of body fat, And usually you are looking, somewhere between 5 or 1 to 2 weeks, of lactation. Sometimes it can linger into 3 weeks in the lactation. And actually, the earlier, the subclinical ketosis started, the usually more severe and higher losses are with the cow. Obese cows are prone to subclinical ketosis much more than cows they are not overconditioned. Okay. And the key solution to this is just the management, look, how those cows are housed, what's the nutrition, and so forth. Then we have a clinical case, and everybody knows about clinical case because the cow is down, you got ketone breath, the manure is dry, and in some severe cases, the cows are not behaving normally. The milk production drops, dry matter intake, drops incredibly. You don't see those signs, with a subclinical ketosis at all. The solution to this is review, ration, and just, provide adequate amount of energy for the cows. And that's the time if the cows is down, the veterinarians or even farmers, they come, and they use the propylene glycol bottle, and feed the cow. And then we have a third kind, and that's a dietary ketosis. And usually we don't hear about this. That usually occurs when poorly fermented wet grass or legume silage with high levels of butyric acid, and we are talking more than 0.5 or 1% of dry matter, is fed to the cows. And it happens, during rainy weather. And there is poor ensignment. Usually you have lactic acid, you got anaerobic fermentation. Well, suddenly when the silage is too wet, the aerobic fermentation takes over, and the lactic acid, it's overtaken basically by butyric acid. So here was the solution. Well, absolutely no feeding, this silage, to transition cows. Of course, farmers are not going to throw it away. If it's really bad, well, then suggestion is get rid of it. But, if you feed them, to other cows, dilution is the solution, just mix it with other healthy silage or something else so you minimize the impact. But if this silage is fed at the beginning of lactation and the cows are already suffering for some clinical ketosis, that actually adds on the top of it and make a situation much worse.
Gotcha.
So we have to be really careful about that. How to find out about, this possibility? Well, farmers do feed analysis, ration analysis, feed analysis on an annual basis. And there is a little line, basically, and you can see whether there is a butyric acid, and how much of this butyric acid is in the particular feed. So,
yeah, and I mean, and butyric acid is usually a pretty strong acid, and pretty
correct.
obvious
And you can
when you
smell it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can smell, it's a foul odor. I usually say when you come to good silage, it smells like a pickle. It's beautiful.
Mhm.
But once you have this, it's not a pickle anymore.
No,
you know.
definitely not.
Well, and they are also impact and negative impact. So I'm going to talk about this subclinical ketosis only of the impact, okay?
Okay.
And so the cows do not show any signs. So it's very easy to ignore it, okay? One of the impact is lower milk production. But
Okay.
it's not much. Research shows it's somewhere between 3 to 7 pounds, per cow. And if you put this cow into the milking street, some 5 pounds per day, you can actually easily overlook it. And, and you overlook it. And if you have 5 cows, they join the milking string and they lose 5 pounds per day. You can say, well, this is not even 200 weights. That's not even $40, so I'm fine with it. And I would say, yes, that's in some case that's true, but that's not the case with the subclinical ketosis is actually really detrimental.
Yeah.
The problem is it has an effect on the body, on the health status of the cow. And that's what, makes, this disease much more costly to our farmers. The estimates are, 120 to $300, per case. And of course, one study was done to 2015, the other one 2016. So it's a little bit, all the numbers, but also depends how you calculate it and so forth. That's why we have this variation, If, we have this ketosis and suddenly, those cows develop displayed abomasum. They can have a high somatic cells. They can have metritis. Those diseases are costly. And you are really, really looking, into high numbers. There was an estimate, let's say, for 100 cows dairy. I know this is a little bit more cows, that average Pennsylvania dairy, but they estimated that if you have this subclinical ketosis, the annual loss can be somewhere from $4,100 to $6,500, and for the
Yeah,
whole herd. And, for a farmer getting, suddenly, how they
That's
would like it. If I
significant.
came to him on his farm on the end of the year, I would, hey, here is a 6,000, cash, free. How would you like it? I think
Yeah.
everybody, so this is the hidden cost usually we don't see. And that's why we tend to ignore it. And, cows, they have subclinical ketosis. They are not treated. And they have 3 times more higher chance being removed from the herd.
Okay.
And that's the ultimate loss, for the farmer, because you have a good cow, takes you, let's say on average, $1,800 or $2,000, to raise it. And guess what? First 30 days, she got to go because something is wrong, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So that's the worst thing, for the farmers. And some of the diseases are very much tied to subclinical ketosis. For example, displaced abomasum is considered sister or paired disease of subclinical ketosis. So if the herd has an excessive amount for number of displaced abomasum, well, then you can bet almost there is a subclinical ketosis in the herd. The other thing is, if there is a ketosis, visible ketosis clinical cases, and you treat it, the estimate is, yeah, if you have 10%, clinical ketosis, you probably have a 40% of the herd, subclinical ketosis. So there is a connection,
Okay.
between these two.
Yeah.
So that's something, we have to consider. And other numbers, if cows, subclinical ketosis are 3 to 19 times more likely to develop displaced abomasum, which is incredible.
Yeah.
7.2 times greater odds of developing metritis due to impaired immune function. Almost 2 times greater odds of developing endometritis, increased severity and duration mastitis. And of course, if something happens, if you have any disease on cows, what first usually suffers is reproduction. So there will definitely be more days open. There will be, late conception and so forth. And that's a loss too, because, hey, you have to feed the cow, cost you something. That doesn't come free. So that's the consequences, of the possible, subclinical ketosis on the farms.
Okay. Yeah. So kind of maybe backtracking a little bit, you said cows that might either have subclinical ketosis or clinical ketosis, they may decrease in milk production, and then eventually it's going to lead to some other disorders. But if you have a cow with subclinical ketosis, what's the best way to determine that she may be subclinical since she's not showing any visible signs?
Well, that's a very good question. And if you don't talk to producers about that, maybe veterinarians would know and they would kind of remind them. But if you don't know about that, you obviously don't notice and you do nothing about that. So the only way is somehow to monitor, what's going on in the herd. And there are some tools to do it.
Okay.
If you know you have a history that happened, if you know you have a clinical cases and you got to treat cows, well, maybe then you should go and test, directly those cows, do cow side test and test them, for ketone bodies in the blood, in the urine, or, in the milk. And, those tests can be bought, on the market. They are not expensive, but they have a little bit, their problems. Those tests with the blood test is the most accurate. Okay,
Okay.
requires a little bit monitor. I don't know, because the monitor costs $50, $60, and you have
Hmm.
these paper strips and take a sample of blood, insert it in, and you will get a reading. Those are the most actually accurate. The milk and urine cow side test, we got to be a little bit careful what we do there because, can be lots of misinterpretation with that.
Okay.
So, the research actually shows that there is 15 to 60% can be misinterpretation of the results of those milk and urine tests. So we
Okay.
really got to be careful how to do that. And if the producer doesn't know, well, you know what, let's talk to the veterinarian or what we can do about that. So
Okay.
that's a one way. It's a direct way, how to find out. Otherwise, and that costs you something. So you have to do some little investment. The cow side tests, the urine or milk, they are not expensive. if you buy the whole kit at the beginning. But then if you start buying, separately those paper strips, they can get, a little bit pricey. And you have to really have a discipline how to do it. You take a sample of urine and milk, and you have a specific time to read it and compare it with the color scale on the bottle. And if you miss it 20 seconds, change color, and suddenly, oops, you have misinterpretation. Okay. And of course, you don't want that. Okay.
Okay.
So
So what
the
would be
other,
some additional ways, I guess, other than the blood test?
yep, the other way, and this is already farmers have at home. It costs them nothing. If they do already DHI data, it's already on the table. Of course, the question is how to look, what to watch.
Mhm.
And the one thing is cows have natural breed characteristics. They produce specific amount of protein or percentage, if you will, specific percentage of fat. And you are looking whether there will be some changes to this, over time. And if they are, they are kind of out of the breed standards, well, that should raise a little bit red flags and ask, okay, what's going on here? So for example, fat, percentage of fat, plus minus, 3%, 0.3%, 0.5, that's okay. Well, if it goes, over that, suddenly, okay, why is that? What's going on? Do those cows really, lose weight too quickly? Why is that? Same applies, to protein. You would like to see for hosting cows plus minus 0.2%. If it's within these limits, that's comfortable. And if it's out of these limits, then can basically signify some sort of metabolic problems. Okay.
Okay.
We have to be
So,
also careful because let's say farmers, they do feel, let's say, only hay diet or rich diet in oil seeds and so forth. So they will have naturally higher fat content. So again, if you do that and it's a more than, this benchmark, well, then you know why. Okay, that's okay. But if you don't feed anything like that, you go regular diet and you will see those changes, well, then you have to be really careful about that. And the
okay.
most important is, the usually first few weeks in lactation, say first months, the first test, if you will, if you are on the DHI data, first test, what are the changes? And then look at the second test because you can see, how the drop was between first test and second test and so forth. That's what you would like to know.
Okay.
So,
So all of
uh,
this would be found under the stage of lactation profile. That's in the
correct,
280,
correct.
correct?
And I
Okay.
will get to it because, I think this is the table, the stage of lactation profile that actually gives out lots of information about the cows. It's on the herd level. It's not on the cow level, like those cow side tests. So we
Right.
have to do a little bit overview of that. So
Okay.
the other thing is I would look at I would monitor this. It would be more for solution, but the dry cow profile. We
Okay.
have it's separated into dry cows, how less than 40 days or 47, and those that are dry more than 70 days. And we have to ask question why? Why do we have those guys? Did we do something wrong with the reproduction? Why is that? Is it only a question of catching heat, or there is something more involved in this? And the thing with this is that those cows usually tend to be overconditioned. And we know that the overconditioned cows are prone to subclinical ketosis.
Okay.
Okay, so that's why, actually I'm kind of mentioning it. I would also look at other things, we were mentioning, other tables and so forth. And usually nobody talks about that. Right away next to the dry cow profile, there is another table. And that's, the yearly summary of cows entered and left the herd. And this is useful table because it basically tells you how many cows overall entered the herd and left, but also it's chopped by lactation, first, second, 3+ lactation. And then we have the reasons why they left the herd. And start with sulfur dairy, low production, repro, mastitis, problems with the other, and so forth. The first two, dairy and low production, that's actually the farmer's decision, whether he's going to sell it.
Okay.
There is a reason for it, So we
Mhm.
call it this voluntary culling. He wants to sell it, wants to get rid of her, fine. Otherwise, she's okay. Now, we have other variables here, such as disease and diet and injury. And when something wrong with the cow for this reason, Well, the farmer suddenly has to sell her because she is not performing anymore because something went wrong with her. That's an involuntary culling. Okay.
Okay.
And you would like to minimize, this portion of cows they left the herd because that's beyond your decision. So, for example, we have a diseases and we have died, and so many times come to talk to farmer, or you can see, the cow dies, and the record will be, well, she died, and you can, why? What happened? Well, I don't know. So, the accuracy of the records, that's actually paramount on all this. So I
Right.
would like also that, and again, it doesn't give you any detail, but what it gives you overall picture of the management, because say if you have totally you cow 30% of your herd. So let's say you have 100 cows and you have a 30% cull rate annual. So that means you are gonna get rid of 30 cows. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly of these 30 cows, 25 cows you have to cull because they have problems.
Mm-hmm.
That's you have a
That's
problem.
a red
Something
flag.
is
Yeah.
going on. And it's up to you, the manager, to find out, okay, what's going on in my herd? Because this is really in my best interest to minimize sales of cows that I must cull because something is wrong with them. So I would look and try to connect, these tables together.
Okay, so we would be looking, as far as the 202 sheet, we'd be looking at stage of lactation, the dry cow profile, and then the yearly herd summary. And we talked about some other factors that you might want to consider trying to determine problems with the transition cow group. Is there anything else you want to add there? I mean, we talked about nutrition a little bit in more detail last week, so I don't know if you can speak on some
I will,
additional
I will,
non-nutritional factors.
I would like to insert one thing, and this
Okay.
is what it goes back to 202 data.
Okay.
When you look at the stage of lactation profile, we mentioned, the level of fat and protein percentages and so forth. There is another thing which is not really so obvious. And because this table is a vertical side is divided by stage of lactation, 1 to 4, 40, 100, 200 days, and so forth. And again, on the horizontal is first lactation, second lactation, 3 plus 4 number of cows, average daily milk, fat and protein, somatic cells, and so forth. And
Mhm.
this is the useful information is here that producers can calculate this fat to protein ratio of this table. Okay.
Okay.
And it's very simple. You take percentage of fat, the first test, percentage of protein, you divide it, and you'll get some number. If there is no problem, the number should be between 1.2, 1.4. When it hits 1.4 to 1.5, well, then that's the time when usually farmers and veterinarians start treating cows for ketosis because that's too high. So you can calculate this for actually first lactation, second lactation, and 3 plus. One thing I have to say, this is the indicator, we are looking, and we have to be careful. If we're talking anything about indicator, we know something is going on, but we don't know exactly what. So it would be really a mistake to take one test and say, hey, you have a high protein ratio versus lactation in July, you have a subclinical ketosis. Well, we have to
Right.
be careful about statements like that because
Yeah.
another thing that really plays a role is number of cow in the particular group. So
Mhm.
let's say first lactation will be really high. The ratio would be, let's say, 1.8, and you have only 2 cows in it. So you would
Right.
say, well, so this is a herd or cow problem, well, 2 cows, so maybe there would be just, cow problem. Look at the heifers, how they were housed when they came from. Did you purchase them or you raise them? That definitely plays a role. So the
Yeah.
number of animals in particular group is a difference. So if you have a large dairy and you have 20 cows, say, in that group, well, that's a totally different story than, let's say, 4 cows, right? So the
Hmm.
interpretation is a little bit different. So we have to
Gotcha.
be really aware of it because the number of cows plays quite a different assessment what's going on. Now, if in the group more than 40% of cows have a fat to protein ratio higher than 1.4, then it's usually considered as a herd problem. And again, if you have 20 cows, that would be, let's say, 8 cows, more than 8 cows. But if you have 4 cows and 2 cows are bad, Well, that's a 50 cows, right? So, or 50%. So you would say, oh, you have a problem. Again, we have to be careful how this is interpreted. So we have to use a little bit common sense. So what producers can do, basically take those numbers and they can do this fat protein ratio, for each lactation group. And they also can do it, in the past. They can go back and they will see how the cows were actually performing. If they are really computer savvy and they want to go into Microsoft Excel and create chart and put this kind of band there, 1.4, 1.2, 1.4, and the cows, the charts or the curve fits into it, even better. Very nice, and more power to those guys. But not everybody's going to do it because, that's takes a time. Not so easy to do this. So, and in this respect, we are really lucky we have a PC Dart because, those charts can be done, out of PC Dart very easily.
Okay.
So we also talk, we mentioned this number of cows in particular group, and how can we actually assess that? And well, PC Dart have the option to do charts, graphs on cows based on days of lactation, let's say, versus percent of fat in the herd versus fat protein ratio. Those charts, they are basically separated by a crosshair into, quarters, and you can adjust it as you want to. And you can see the percentages. You can know, okay, we have in this group, which is less than 40 days in milk, we have a total, let's say total 120 cows and more than 4.5%, fat or 5%, out of 400, we have a 60 cows. So we are, on the high side. Why is that? Because we would like to be there. We would like to see less than 10%. And let's say suddenly we'll have a 40% or 50%. So something is wrong here. And that should kind of set, the signal, okay, let's do more investigation here, how this actually works. So in this respect, PC Dart is very powerful tool, to assess some potential metabolic problems during the transition period and into.
Okay. Yeah, that was kind of one of the questions that came to my mind, if there was a way for them to graph this without having to go through Excel. You're saying PC Dart will do that. Are there any other programs that you're aware of that will?
I would say I'm not too familiar with the DHIA 305, but those softwares are very similar. I would be surprised if DHIA would not do that. Very surprised. I think this is kind of universal feature of all these herd management softwares.
Okay. We've kind of covered quite a bit of different things to look at. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, or what would be your biggest takeaways for our listeners?
One thing I would like to also mention that those are different factors that they could possibly influence, the prevalence of subclinical ketosis on dairy farms.
Okay, yeah.
Some breeds are, different than the others. For example, Jerseys, they tend to have higher prevalence of ketosis than Holsteins.
Okay.
Research shows, somewhere between 11 to 25%. Holsteins actually from 0 to 28%. The body condition score, of course, that's one thing we already mentioned. Overconditioned cows, prone. So watching, body condition score, farmer, just, go through the farm, through the barn, sometimes look at the cow and do some sort of assessment, would be helpful. Mm-hmm. We also talk about days in milk. That's another other thing. The early lactation cows are more prone. High lactation cows are more prone to subclinical ketosis than low lactation cows. Seasonal differences. And research is not really up to it because sometimes, some research says, well, summer time is the worst one because we have heat stress. It's a suppress dry matter intake, Well, some research would argue with that, and they would say, no, actually, it's a springtime. It's not summertime. It's a springtime. So, season can be different, but it more boils down, as they, research say, it boils down to the management because, some season, let's say summertime, would bring more relaxed management. You are not really up to it because it's summer, everything is fine, and that can be kind of the impetus, for subclinical ketosis, for the herd. So Herd size, that's another thing. If you look at large herds have generally lower prevalence of subclinical ketosis, because they group cows differently, makes a huge difference. And then we were talking about one other thing, and usually farmers don't realize it. There are some non-biological factors. And believe it or not, it boils down to cow comfort.
Okay.
Basically,
Yep.
if the cow is relaxed, she has all time she needs on earth, well, the chances to develop subclinical ketosis are minimized. So if she doesn't have it, we call it those stressor factors.
Okay.
And
Yep.
what's that? What's the stressor factor? And the stressor factor is, well, you know what? Your feed bank is not actually full. Call it this empty bank syndrome sometimes, because you come to the barn, and there is nothing in the feed bank, and cows, would like to eat. It's interesting how sometimes this is accepted, because some farmer says, well, it's good if she a little bit fights for her food. It just you say, oh, really, you really want that? So so pushing feed on time, the rule of thumb, do it at least every 4 hours. If she has a time for rumination, because if she cannot ruminate, the digestion is different, she doesn't have energy, like glucose and so forth. So all this plays an important role. Keeping her too long out of her pen, that's other thing. Anything this, that basically creates a stress. And we do not see it, unfortunately, that way. We think it's normal. But for the cow, that's a stressful situation. Cow needs to lay down at least, 12, 16 hours a day. And if she has the time, and all this stuff, then she will be fine. Overcrowding, close up cows. And, we usually talk 100%, stocking rate, which means what? One stall per cow,
Yep.
and at this time of the life, these 3 weeks, 4 weeks before, actually it needs to be 1.2 stalls per cow. In other words, 80% of stocking rate. Okay.
Yeah.
And again, if she doesn't have it, it creates stress because she doesn't have a place to lay down. It's a competition.
Right.
Talking about competition, same, commingling older cows with young cows. That's not good. Older cows tend to be dominant. It's a fight for a food, and they tend to push, the young cows out. And that's, again, it's a stress. Okay. So all this, and it's a more management style. This is, where this 80% of causes of subclinical ketosis come from. It's not only nutrition. Nutrition, as I mentioned before, has 15 to 20% occurrence of or prevalence of subclinical ketosis. The rest comes from management factors. And this is it. And if you look at the top herds, they are not particularly benchmarks, but if you look at occurrence of, let's say, displaced abomasum, metritis, milk fevers, the top herds, they are usually, below 3%. That's actually when the benchmark comes from, because they set the benchmark for a good job,
Okay.
Same for retained placenta. If you have a more than 8%, man, you have a problem. And those good herds, they basically follow these management steps, make out comfortable. They are, well, these numbers. So,
Yeah.
so the takeaway would be, honestly, is do good reporting on your data.
Okay.
If you do not provide quality data about your cows, you are shooting yourself into the foot, because on the end, the report you get doesn't reflect what you actually have on a farm. So take a
Gotcha.
time and do it. And that relates not only, DHI data, but also to cow records, health records. You really take the time, go and write down why the cow actually died. What was wrong? Because, in future, maybe there will be time you will need it. You never know. So that's,
Right.
what I would say, if nothing else, this would be probably the helpful thing. And of course, talk to your nutritionist. Make sure that the ration is enough of dry matter per day when the cows are in a dry period, when they join the herd, how, and all this stuff. That's a definitely yes. That's
Yeah.
a
Yep. Definitely working with your nutritionist and your vet to identify any issues and then making sure you're on top of
yeah,
your management.
yeah.
Yeah.
Just the way how to think about that. Something happens. Well, this is not coincidence. Maybe there is something in the background. That's what I would like to. And don't ignore, those indicators, because this means what? Indicator is something happened somewhere. We don't know what. but
Hmm.
something is wrong, and it's up to us to find out. And call extension. We have people all around the state, and they
Oh,
know this
yeah.
stuff. They will go through you. They will ask the right questions because if you know how to ask the right questions, that's the half of the battle is already won.
Hmm.
Don't know what kind of questions ask. Well, then you are going to be spinning your wheels, and you don't want that.
Right. Well, thank you, Michael, for taking the time to talk with us today. And thank you to all of our listeners. If you have any questions regarding today's episode, you can email me at kzm175@psu.edu. And don't forget to tune in for the next episode of the Bovine Banter podcast, where Ginger Fenton will be interviewing Dr. Adrian Berrigan about his research with transition cows at Penn State.